stop being a passive subject of the AI's opinion and become an active engineer of its understanding. In 2026, this is the most successful brands will be those who intentionally and systematically shape how machines perceive them. Hi, I'm Nik Ranger, and this is SEO in 2026.
Nick, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one tip is to stop thinking about just ranking on Google and start focusing on a new discipline, AI visibility engineering. This is where we can systematically probe AI models to measure brand associations, quantify perception, and then use those insights to engineer on-page, off-site, and do our wonderful little strategic actions that actually can influence how these machines understand and represent our clients.
Okay, I love the phrases that you come up with. AI visibility engineering. There's a t-shirt phrase for today. So is it not the case that if we write wonderful web pages aimed at humans, then that should be enough to feature an AI, or do we have to do entirely different things to also try and feature there?
I love this question because I think it really starts to unpack where we need to think and how we need to think about it. Because what I mean by AI visibility engineering is because it's critical because LLMs, large language models, they're becoming the new discovery layer. As we've just seen, I think of September 18th, 2025, we just saw that Google have announced that we're going to see Gemini actually influence the way that Google search works in even deeper modality, even deeper in the way that people search. For us, as we need to understand it, these aren't just search results. They are an answer engine that forms narratives around the brands. So if a model misunderstands your brand's core value proposition, it can misrepresent you to millions of users at the point of decision. This is aimed at pretty much any business where brand perception, trust, and authority are key drivers of conversation. So pretty much virtually everyone from e-commerce all the way to B2B, SaaS, it's really going to impact absolutely everyone. And that's why it's such a current and prescient topic right now. So tackle this. The work that we do at Dijon, our work now splits into answering two fundamental questions. First, for our clients or for the brands that you work with, first, a diagnostic one, how are you currently being impacted by AI? And second, more of a strategic one of how we can influence the AI model to recommend the brand. So to answer both, you first have to understand the two minds of the AI. You have the interpretive layer, and this is what everybody sees. This is what people type into the browser. This is what people type in the models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, etc. And then you have the agentic layer. Now, this is the thing that we're wanting to really tackle. This is the in-depth layer where we can be able to see in the way that the AI is actually influenced. So it's where it makes its key decisions. And I think one thing to really understand is when we're wanting to figure out whether or not it's going to be impacted, we have grounded results and we have ungrounded results. And that's something really important that I think everyone needs to be really comfortable with understanding. So with grounded results, these are queries, sole sentences that are influenced by real-time information that is retrieved. With RAG, it's called Retrieval Augmented Generation. So this is where all of our traditional SEO efforts really give us a direct leverage. Then you can be able to have ungrounded results when you're putting it into the model, and that's basically generated from the model's static retrained memory. So when a user's wanting to type in something, more often than not from our research, we see that with Google Gemini, almost 99 to 100% of all the sentences, all the queries that you input, pretty much all of those are grounded. So everything is actually being influenced by the AI model for Google search. And for ChatGPT, it pretty much ranges from 91% to about 96% of what it's using for grounded results. That's why it's really important to us as SEOs and to brands, because we're seeing that in the way that users are searching nowadays, it doesn't matter whether it's on a search engine or whether it's in an AI model, they're going to be pulling from real-time information from the web and pulling that in RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, combining this with its pre-trained model to be able to give them that result. And that's why it's really important for us to understand this and to be able to then think about the agentic layer. How do we get our brands represented well in an AI model's mind?
So grounded results, obviously AI using live search to augment or perhaps provide the user with live information to their particular query, ungrounded results based upon their existing database. Are you seeing more and more searches move to grounded results? And is that going to be the default position for AI search moving forward?
So Dan Petrovich, who I'm going to be referencing a lot throughout this, he has done a lot of research in pulling out and training a query demands grounding classification. So this is a model that was pulled from multiple different queries in AI mode and looking at Search Console results across like all the Search Console environments that we have, and pre-training this model to be able to detect what is a query that will demand grounding and what doesn't. With this pre-trained model, this is what we use when we're doing classification. So when we're pulling this out with, like, say, for example, like, a client comes to us and says, how have we been influenced? So we basically extract all the queries out of their Search Console and we pull out the content. We build this down into vector embeddings. Basically, we're just translating it for a machine. Sorry, folks, we work in machine learning, so we're going to have like big terms like this. We build them down. And so we want to be able to then figure out how the specific semantic intent for each of these queries, what they mean. So when we're able to train it with the query demands grounded classification, we can be able to see whether or not these queries would or would not be grounded. So that's why I'm saying, like, from our research, like pretty much almost 100% of all the queries are all grounded with Google Gemini. And that is powering a lot of Google Search, Google Gemini, and a lot of Google's resources are in their entire ecosystem with these results. So pretty much almost every query that people are inputting these days is being augmented in some way by the model.
Is this affecting every industry, every country? Or are you seeing certain industries more focused on this and more affected by this?
Well, when this book comes out, I think there will be a lot more countries that are impacted. As we're talking about this in 2025, it's a bit hard to sort of say what it's going to look like when someone is reading this. But I think, like, in the way that we're seeing this, we're following the money, we're following the investments, we're following the pathway and the direction that a lot of our big tech providers are going. So we're seeing, like, I think in Malaysia, it just came out 4 months ago. Worldwide, we've seen this like a part of the search, for years now. It's going to be a part of the search experience as of a lot more integrated as of September 18th. I think by the time people read this, it's going to be a very different landscape, and I think it's going to be even more integrated. The thing that's really cool at the moment is that if we can be able to understand it, we can be able to measure it in the way that we have. And I'm really, really hoping that we go onto the tracking and understanding this about how to like actually look at the models. We can be able to see and test this right now. We can be able to influence the models and see what is actually working and what's not. That's where I think like everyone's going to be a lot more affected by this in a massive way. I just can't tell to the degree or to the scale, but I think it's going to be pretty much universal.
And in terms of influencing the models, what are you seeing to be the most effective ways to do that at the moment?
There are so many different AI rank tracking tools out there at the moment. We've got a very lean, succinct, and efficient model. So basically, the way that we do it is different to, I think, a lot of other trackers do it, which is we establish a baseline with bidirectional probing. So this means that we ask the model 2 sets of questions, like, that are brand to entity and entity to brand. So what I mean by this is, like, what are top concepts associated with your brand, and input your brand there. And entity to brand is like, who are the top brands you associate with your service or your products or something that you are wanting to be seen and known for by the AI model, right? So this gives us a quantifiable score for how the brand's perception and its market position in the model's mind. Like I was saying before, this bidirectional probing is really helpful for us because now we understand like what entities that we want to be known for. with a business, they have their core services, they have their core products, they have an idea of like, how important those are to different markets. We can be able to look at it by country. We can be able to understand this. And the way that we track this is we have a way of looking at this by a confidence score. So how confident is the model to be able to take that suggestion from you or from your competitor? So these are the ways that we are starting to split out the difference. It's not just like a binary yes or no. It's also like, well, in what specific percentage and what specific way is this being assigned?
So you recommend building topical authority with query fan out and then moving on to unpacking the AI's mind with tree walker analysis. What is tree walker analysis?
Yeah, great. Well, let's not also skip over query fan out. So just taking a step out of how these core concepts fit in the pipeline, if you will. So the AI rank by Dijon AI tool, that's where we start with looking at this. We do this for not just the brand to the entity, we also look at the competitors and in what countries that they're looking at. So we can get very, very specific on how confident the model is. And that gives us a really, really good litmus test and a way of being able to track it because we can quite literally see a graph of change. Now, like I said before, we've got the query demands classification model that we've trained on your Search Console. Query fan out is all of the relative ways that a model could potentially be able to find you. So query fan out is essentially creating synthetic queries, multiple different fan of different results that could potentially be found for your specific brand. So with query fan out and the way that we do it, we look at whether or not we have those results already captured by Search Console. And that's, giving an idea of like market share. And we can also see this for the same for competitors and how that sort of ranks there. But more importantly, we can also see all the results that aren't currently captured by Search Console. So now we can be able to see whether or not like all of the different variations, whether this is, relevant to us, whether this is really important. So again, we've trained the model with our client data on their clicks, on their impressions, on their relative rank. And we train it with the query fan out to be able to see whether or not like this has the relevance. This now gives us a really good lens of, okay, well, here's all the ways that the model can be able to find and source and cite our brand, but we just don't actually have the on-page content or the correct positioning to be able to see that. So that's what query fan out is designed to do. When it comes to tree walker analysis, this is now looking at the model in the confidence of how the model is picking you or even not picking you. Because it's really, really important to us to be able to understand, okay, well, where the model is really, really confident and be able to see it, we can see the sentence in which it generates it. Every single word that precedes the next has a tokenistic probability of what precedes the next. So having tree walker, this is literally creating branches of different prop results. And we can be able to see the sentence that it constructed, whether or not the model has confidence of constructing the next word. Now, this is really, really important, particularly with brand positioning, with particularly really being quite fine-tuned in the way that we're presenting this, in the way that we're constructing these sentences. Because if, say, for example, we wanted to have a specific representation of a brand to say this brand is the leading provider of mattresses and pillows. Cool. So, there are a brand that is specifically about this, and the model has really good confidence to say this brand X, whatever, is a leading provider of confident of mattresses, very confident, and pillows. Maybe we might see where the model is uncertain about this. In the way that we're wanting to deconstruct this, and again, we do this at scale, we make sure that there is a good way of testing this to eliminate waste so that we're really quite certain about these statements. We can be able to see where the model is not as confident, and that tells us that with the results, it doesn't have a good understanding of this particular entity and our brand. So if we were to do, going back to AI rank, if we were to do like brands to entity, and we've like mapped out brand X to mattresses, brand X to pillows, we can actually see and measure how confident the model is. And we can have a lot more of a consolidated idea of like, well, when creating the content, let's maybe focus more on pillows, because that is something that the brand wants to be a leading provider of for the sleep community. So we're wanting to create specific content to be able to go there, to be able to add that. We have a really good idea of all the query fan outs of what we're not currently capturing in the market. We can be able to strategically add those to the site. Or it might even be that we need to do more brand positioning to be able to say like, this brand is the leading provider of pillows, and really be quite specific in the way that they've been cited. And something that is, as of right now, that Dan Petrovich has also developed is a better methodology of actually looking at citation mining, specifically on what sources that the AI model is pulling to be able to find these suggestions, and what brands and what specific URLs. And again, like a confidence of those of what they're using. So now we have a lot more of a qualified way of wanting to go after and do some link prospecting and brand relationships with very specifically what the AI model is finding and using at scale. So we have really good confidence in the way that we are doing prospecting.
Nik, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
Thank you so much. I feel like I've talked a lot, but the key takeaway, I think, is stop being a passive subject of the AI's opinion and become an active engineer of its understanding. In 2026, this is the most successful brands will be those who intentionally and systematically shape how machines perceive them.
Nik Ranger is a senior technical SEO at Dejan AI. Find out more over at dejan.ai. Nik, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at SEOin2026.com.